Still waiting for some people to arrive.
Yeah, I think it's about 5:10. If not, then give just like a book screen.
Hmm.
It's like, if not, if people don't show up within like 5, 10, 15, just do like a book screen thing. Just faster.
Yeah.
Cut the fluff.
Hello.
It's good. It's good.
Not my health.
What are you guys gonna start again?
Hmm?
How long before you guys start?
We're waiting for a couple people to arrive. So.
Wait, let me ask you. So you worked at APL this summer, right? So
Okay, so we're gonna get started with Intro to Blender. So first of all, what is Blender? Well, to show off what Blender is, we have just like a short little video that just kind of showcases what it's capable of. So yeah, you can create scenes like this.
Is this still a Middleton Blender?
Hmm?
The VR support?
Yeah, there's VR support.
I forget I did that before.
Okay, so there was a lot in that video, but we're just going to be focusing on 3D modeling, no like rendering, texturing, any of that other stuff, just for simplicity. Oh, I didn't play it again. Okay, so if you haven't installed Blender already, just go to blender.org and go ahead and download it. So first of all, we're going to go through the interface and basic navigation of Blender. So by default, it's split into these 4 areas. You have the 3D viewport, which is where all your 3D objects go. You have the timeline, which is for animation. We won't be worrying about that. The outliner, this is where all of the objects appear in the scene. And then properties is just properties of each object, which we'll get to later. So first, we have the 3D viewport, which is the most important area of your Blender, and it's where you'll spend most of your time. You can add, remove, and arrange the positions and rotations of objects. And then up in the top right, we have the outliner. This just shows you a list of all the objects in the scene. Collections are like folders of objects. And then you can click these eyeballs here to make things visible or invisible. So you can sort of hide things. And everything in the entire scene is contained in the scene collection. Properties, there's a lot of things here, but the ones we're going to worry about are modifiers, which is this little wrench, object data properties, and materials. Those are the most important ones that you'll use most of the time. And the user interface of Blender is extremely customizable. In the top left corner of any panel, you can change the panel type. You can resize panels by dragging on the edges, or you can right-click on the edge to join or split panels. So here's one of the most important things to do in Blender. To navigate the 3D viewport using a mouse, I'll give the touchpad instructions in a minute. But in order to navigate the viewport, which I'll show here, you can click and drag with the middle mouse button, the scroll wheel. So that allows you to orbit the camera like so. You can hold Shift to pan. And you can hold Alt to snap to a view looking directly into one of the axes. Use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. And if you have a number pad, you can press period to focus on the object. And then next we have for touchpad. If you have a touchpad, you can click and drag this thing to orbit around. You can click and drag this to zoom in and out, this to pan, and this to snap to where the camera is. So there's just alternate controls for touchpads. Okay. So next, we're going to try adding some objects. So first of all, we don't need by default, when you create a new file in Blender, it comes with these like camera, cube, and light. We don't need these things, so we're just going to right-click on this collection and say delete hierarchy. That will get rid of everything. So we just have like a plain file. And then in this viewport, we're going to say Shift A. This allows you to add any object you want, any primitive object that is. The ones that we're going to be concerned about today are under the mesh category. So you can add plane, cube, circle, etc., etc. So I'll just add a cube. And you can see we have our cube here. So Shift A is add. To move an object, you can either use this move tool and drag the arrows like this. However, this is quite slow and kind of tedious if you want to move quickly. So you can also use G to move an object if you just press G. And then once you press G, you can constrain it to an axis. So you can say X to move it only on the X-axis, Y to move it only on the Y-axis, and Z to move it on the Z-axis, which is up and down. And you can right-click to cancel the movement if you want. And then same thing for rotation. You can use this tool over here and drag the different axes like this. Or you can press R to rotate. And then the exact same thing applies with X, Y, Z. Rotation X if you press X, Y if you press Y, and Z if you press Z. And then the last one is scaling, which is this tool. Oh, it's kind of covered up, but yeah, right there. And then this just allows you to scale along the different axes like that. Or you can press S to scale, and then you can scale in and out, X, Y, and Z. So I know that might be a lot to remember, but just remember G for move, R for rotate, S for scale, and then X, Y, Z. Remembering those shortcuts will make your life in Blender a lot easier because moving your mouse over here to these tools is kind of quite slow. So next we'll talk about viewport shading. So there are a couple different options up in this upper right corner. The first one is this X-ray mode. So if you press this, you can actually see through the object and select through it. So for example, if I add a sphere behind this. So let's say I have a sphere behind this cube, and I can't see it right now. Like I can't select it really, but I can press this, and now I can select the sphere through the cube because we're in X-ray mode. And then these options are different shading options. So the first one is wireframe, which just lets you see all the edges. This is the like standard mode. These two are for material and rendering. Those you would only worry about if you're actually creating an image, but we're just worrying about modeling, so we're not going to worry about that. So I'll just delete these by pressing X. Oh yes, and you can press Z to quickly switch between them like this. Okay, so next we need to talk about shading smooth and shading auto smooth. So if I add a sphere, you can see that it's not actually a sphere. It's actually made up of a bunch of rectangular faces because that's just how 3D graphics works. However, if I actually want to make it look like a sphere, I can right click and there's a couple options. Shade flat is what it currently is on. That's the default. Shade smooth will make it shade, like it will smooth out the edges and make it look like it's an actual sphere. And then auto smooth, which looks like the same thing, but that's because I need to show you a different shape. So let me demonstrate with a cylinder. You can see that we have a couple of really shallow angles along the edges and then a sharp 90-degree angle on the top. If I shade smooth, it looks really bad. That's because it's shading over both the really shallow angles and the 90-degree angle. And the 90-degree angle is an issue because we want this to be a sharp edge. Instead, if I shade auto smooth, it will actually shade the shallow angles smoothly and the sharp angles it will leave as shaded flat. And this is generally what you want for most objects. So when in doubt, just use shade auto smooth. And if you want to change the angle, you can go to the object data properties, which is this green triangle, under normals, and then you can change the angle here. So right now it's set to 30 degrees, but if I set it to something high, like 100 degrees, it looks bad again because we're shading over the 90-degree angle, which is not what we want. But yeah, that's what auto smooth is. Okay, hide and unhide. You can click the eyeball to hide and unhide things, or you can press H to hide and Alt H to unhide. Pretty self-explanatory. And then Shift H will hide everything except for the object that you currently have selected. Next, we'll talk about editing modes. So far, we've only been in object mode, which is for placing and laying out objects. But edit mode actually lets you modify the mesh, like the individual vertices and edges of an object. So yeah, this is basically what I just said. Object mode is the mode we've been in so far. Edit mode, let me demonstrate. So you can use this drop down to go into edit mode. We're not going to worry about these other modes. Or you can press tab since it's such a common thing to do. So tab switches to edit mode and then tab again switches back to object mode. You can see in edit mode, we now can see all the vertices and edges. And just like we did before with the objects, we can use our tools like G, R, and S to move, rotate, and scale different things. Let me just go to the next slide. Yeah. So you can see these three buttons up here, which are all the way up here. The first one is vertex, the second one is edge, and the third one is face. So if I go to edge mode or press 2, the shortcuts are 1, 2, 3. If I press 2, then you can select edges instead of vertices. And if I select 3, you can select entire faces. So that's 1 for vertices, 2 for edges, 3 for faces. And just like before, we can move them, we can rotate them, and we can scale them, just like we could in object mode. So you can also hide using H. Whoops, I didn't really do that. So I can hide this, or I can hide this face. And so you can unhide with Alt H. Same shortcuts as in object mode. Press A to select everything. So that's pretty self-explanatory. And to deselect, you just click out into the empty space. You can hold Shift to select multiple things in a row. And you can hold Control to select like on everything in between. So if I select this face, hold Control, select this one, it will select everything in between them. Now, if you hold Alt and we're in edge mode, it will select an entire loop of edges. So if I select this edge while holding Alt, it will select the entire loop, like so. And if I were to add another cut, like here, don't worry about what I just did, then I can hold Alt to select these edge loops as well. So that's a pretty useful feature. And then L will select everything that's linked or connected. So if I add another sphere here that's like disconnected, I go over here and press L, it will only select the cylinder, and if I go over here and press L, it will only select the sphere. So yeah. Next, we'll move on to basic modeling. So the absolute most basic, I'll just delete this, modeling techniques are extruding, edge loops, edge slides, inset, and bevel. So the absolute most fundamental operation, I'll just start with by adding a cube and going into edit mode. The most fundamental operation in 3D modeling is extruding. If you press E, or you can use this toolbar on the side, I know it's kind of faded out, but there is one that says extrude, or you can just press E. It will actually add geometry by sort of extending a face outward. So I can extrude that one like this. I can extrude this one out like this, and so on like that. The next thing is to add an edge loop. There is an edge loop tool on the side. It's right here. It's called Loop Cut. If you can kind of see my mouse cursor, or you can press Control R. Once you press that, it will add this sort of yellow overlay, and then you select the loop you want to cut. Then you can scroll up and down to add more or less cuts. So like default is 1, then you scroll up and it's 2, 3, 4, so on. And then once you have the number that you want, left click, and then you can slide them up and down if you want to position them. If you don't want to move them, then you just right click. And now we have 4 extra loop cuts around this area. And then we can continue on going on and extruding things out like this. You can also, if you select a vertex, like let's say I want to slide this vertex right here, you can double press G to slide it up and down or along an edge like this. So that just lets you slide vertices or edges. And the next most important thing is insetting a face. Insetting a face is basically just making a smaller face inside a larger face. So if I press I, or I use this inset tool, which is right here, I can actually create a smaller face inside this bigger face, and I can even do it again. And then, you know, I can continue like extruding out the things that I want. And then last but not least, we can bevel an edge, which is this tool right there. Or if I select an edge, I can press Control B and then move the mouse to bevel it. And just like with loop cuts, you can scroll up and down to add more and more cuts. So if I scroll up a lot, it'll add a lot more cuts. When I scroll down all the way, it's just like one singular cut. So I'll just add, you know, a couple cuts like that. So that's how you like smooth out a sharp edge. And those are all the most basic 3D modeling techniques for now. Okay, I know I've gone through like kind of quickly. Are there any questions so far? Extrude? Okay, let me just delete this and start over with a basic cube. So let's say I have this face selected. If I use the extrude tool, I can pull this up to create new geometry. So extruding lets you create new geometry given like an existing face. Does that make sense? Like it's extending a face outwards from the model or inwards. So like if I go here and I extrude inwards, it will actually like subtract from the model. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. How do I what? Oh, like this? Like how did I create that thing in the picture? All right. So I'm gonna go with the cube. It looks like the first thing I did was add, go into edit mode. I added some loop cuts like that. What? Oh, like what I just do?
Yes.
Okay, so first I added some loop cuts. Maybe it would be easier if I showed with the tool over here. So there's this tool down here called loop cuts.
Oh.
Yeah, it's called a loop cut. Sorry, do I need to talk louder? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so then you can scroll up or down to create more. Well, I guess you have to, you know, do it like that. So that just adds more like loops around the model, like so. Whoops. And then you can inset the top face by pressing I or using this tool here. And then I can extrude it upwards. And then it looks like the last thing I did was I selected these edges here and then beveled them. Yeah. And that creates the thing in the picture. So that's how I did that. Does that make sense? Okay. So we'll move on to the next thing. Separating and joining objects. So you can actually separate parts of a mesh and then, or join multiple meshes into one object. So let's say, for example, I wanted to make this face into a separate object. What you can do is press P and then say selection. And now you'll notice that we actually have cube and cube.001. It turns out that cube.001 is actually this face, but like taken off of the model. So this is our original model. This is the new model. And we've just taken the face off the model and transformed it into a new object. And then if we want to sort of put them back together, what we can do is select both of them, press Ctrl J to join them, and now they are together again, and there's just one cube. Okay, parenting objects. How many of you have used Unity before, or like a game engine? Okay, so I assume you're familiar with the concept of like parent-child objects, right? So let's say I were to add a sphere, and then if I wanted to parent the sphere to the cube, I can select the sphere, shift select the parent object, and then Control P, and then just say object. Now you can see in our hierarchy, we have this cube, and then if we drop down, the sphere is actually underneath it. And if we move this, the sphere actually moves with it. So it's like Unity, the sphere is a child of the cube. But of course, we can still move this one independently, and it will still move with the parent. And if we scale it down, it will also, scale, rotate, same thing. The child will follow the parent. Okay. Oh yes, and if you want to undo it, then so you select the child, press Alt-P, and then click Clear Parent, and now they are no longer parent-child. Okay. Next, we need to talk about proportional editing. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to create just a flat line on the ground. So in order to do that, I'll create a plane. I will delete these two vertices, so now we just have a line. And then I will add a bunch of vertices to the line, like this. So now we just have a line with a bunch of vertices. Now, let's say I wanted to make this line kind of like a curved shape like this. What I can do is I can select one of the vertices, and then I can go up here to proportional editing, and you can see the shortcut is the letter O. And then when I select this vertex, I try to move it, you can see that I have this circle and that I can make bigger and smaller by scrolling in and out. And so if I scroll in, you can see that it's moving less of the vertices, and if I scroll out, it's moving more of them. So this allows me to edit other vertices less and less as I get farther away. And you can actually change the fall off. So right now it's smooth, but if I turn it to, for example, sharp, and then I move it, you can see that the shape of it is a lot different, and it's a sharper edge. Or I can do like sphere, for example, and then it will look like more circular, like that. So that's proportional editing. It just lets you move one vertex or one edge, and then all the things around it will also be moved, but the amount it will be moved will decrease the farther away it is. All right. The next thing we need to talk about, which I think is the final thing before we get to modeling, is modifiers. Modifiers are basically functions that take in a mesh and output a new mesh, and so they modify the mesh of an object. But the important thing is that they can be toggled on and off. So they're called non-destructive because you can modify a mesh with the modifier on it, and then later on you can remove the modifier and the original mesh is still there. So for example, like if I wanted to extrude this out like that, and then later on I wanted to change the shape of this, I now can't because now I have to like delete it and then change it and try again. But if I were to use a modifier, I could do it differently. Like for example, let me just undo that. Now we'll add a solidify modifier. Oh, that's not what I want. Fill. Actually, no, you can't use solidify. You'd have to. This is a bad example, but anyway, the point is that if I take a cube, add a modifier such as bevel, it will bevel the edges of the cube. Then, if I wanted to modify the original cube, I could actually move this. Let me turn off proportional editing. Move this out, and you can see that even though the original cube is modified, the bevel continues to modify the original mesh. Does that make sense? I know it's a little bit confusing, but basically, if I modify the original mesh, the bevel will apply to the original mesh. And then if I click apply, it will actually put the modifier on the mesh itself. And now I can't really, like if I wanted to make modifications to it, I can't go back and like undo the bevel because it's applied. Does that make sense? Okay. And you can also put multiple modifiers on an object. So if I go back into the bevel, and then I can add another one such as subdivision surface, which will smooth out the entire thing. And that applies after the bevel. And you can also change the order. So I could subdivide it and then bevel it, which will look a little bit weird. But the order of modifiers matters, and they'll apply top to bottom. Yeah, so in order to add a modifier to an object, you go to the wrench tab, which is modifiers, and you click add modifier, and there are different categories, or you can search. Then let me get a cube actually. There are different visibilities. So for each modifier, there are different like visibility settings. This one will show in edit mode. This one will show in the viewport. So you can see if I disable it, it just shows a regular cube. And this one is for render, but we're not going to worry about rendering for now. And so you can see if I disable it in edit mode, once I go into edit mode, we can see the cube. And if I enable it, you can see it applies even in edit mode. And if we turn this on, then this actually makes it so that we can see the actual mesh in edit mode. So you can see the difference here. Like here we have the cube mesh, and here we have the subdivided mesh. Yeah, I already talked about this. If you want to make a modifier permanent, you can apply it. And now this is just our new object. But you only want to do this if you absolutely have to, because once you do it, and then you make later changes to mesh, you can't go back. So that's why you should only apply modifiers if you absolutely have to. The most common modifier is the one I just showed, subdivision surface. It allows you to smooth out the edges of a mesh, similar to bevel, but it actually adds more geometry, like it splits each face into parts. And the amount of levels can be increased. So if I change this to 2, you can see it gets smoother, and then 3, it gets even smoother, 4, so on and so forth. Solidify is another really common modifier. If I have a flat 2D object, such as a plane, and I solidify it, I can change the thickness, and you can see it extrudes the faces out. Solidify is essentially just extruding all the faces of an object. And you can see also if I add a cube and then solidify it, it doesn't appear as though anything happened. But if I go into X-ray, you can see that the walls of the cube actually have thickness now. So if I were to like slice this in half, for example, what's the best way to do that? Okay, now I've sliced it in half. And you can see that the walls have thickness now. So solidify just gives thickness to objects. The next one is mirror. I'll just use this object as an example. If I were to add a mirror modifier, mirror, and then I want it to mirror along the y-axis, you can see it does exactly what it says it does. It just creates a flipped copy of the object on the other side as if there was a mirror in the middle. And one important option is clipping. Clipping makes it so that if the two objects meet in the center, they'll essentially be glued together or joined together. Oops. So if I select all of these and move them towards the center, you can see they will actually meet in the middle and connect. And they will be joined together as if they were one. That's what clipping does. So this allows you, the mirror modifier allows you to easily create symmetrical objects. Bevel I already kind of talked about. So let's start with a fresh cube. And then bevel. It does the same thing as Control B in edit mode. It just smooths out the edges of an object, but it doesn't subdivide the spaces, unlike the subdivision surface modifier. And you can adjust the amount, which is how far it bevels, and the amount of segments, which is how smooth it is. Okay, that concludes the intro section. Now we're going to get into actually modeling a headset. So before we start that, does anyone have any lingering questions? Okay. Raise your hand if you're actually going to go along with me and model the headset. Okay, sure. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start by modeling the basic shape of the exterior of the headset. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to Shift A to add an object. And you can just follow along with me. We're going to go to Mesh, and we're going to add a circle. I want this circle to be facing up and down, so I'm going to rotate it on the x-axis by 90 degrees. And if you remember from earlier, you could use the rotation tool, but a faster way to do it is to press RX to rotate along the x. And then I'm going to type 90 for 90 degrees and hit Enter. And so by typing RX90, we've rotated along the x-axis 90 degrees. And so that's just a faster way of doing it rather than using the mouse. The next thing we're going to do is actually go into edit mode. And I'm going to select half of the circle. Actually, we're not going to... I'm going to select half the circle. And then to invert the selection, I press Control-I. So we've selected the other half, not including the top and bottom points. And then I press X to delete the vertices. So now we have half of a circle. Okay, are we at this point yet? Okay. Next, I'm going to move the half of the circle over on the x-axis a little bit to make it wider. So I've just moved it over on the x to the left. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a modifier. We're going to add a mirror, which is the one I was just talking about earlier. And you can see that by default, it mirrors along the x-axis. And so we get this thing on the other side. And now I think, because this is going to be the shape of our headset, I think it needs to be a little wider. So I'm going to move it along the x-axis even more. That may be too much. Okay, that looks good to me. Now we need to join these two together. And if you remember from earlier, the option to join two mirrored objects together is clipping. So I'm going to turn on clipping. And then I'm going to select these two vertices on the end here. And then I'm going to move them back towards the center. And once we meet in the center, because we have clipping turned on, these two will actually join together. The vertices will essentially be glued together. And then if we come back out of edit mode, you can see we have this shape here. Do we have this shape? Is everyone good? No? Do you need help? Okay, I can help you. then you're going to select the object and go into edit mode. Yep. And then you want to delete everything on this side, but not including the top and bottom space. So you can just drag and select those spaces. And then, yeah. And then just select everything and move it to the left on that side. Okay. Yep. Perfect. And then turn on clipping because we want to glue them together. It's a little checkbox right there. Clipping. And then select these two and move them back. Yeah. Yeah, so the top one and the bottom. Yeah. You need to shift. So select multiple, you hold shift. Or you can just do that. And then G, so you want to move them back, so GX. GX. Yeah. And then move them back towards the center like that. Cool. Did all that make sense? Yes. Okay, cool. So now we're at this one. All right, so the next thing that we need to do is to create the little nose thing. So you can see we have this little like indent. That's where like the person's nose would be in the headset. And we're gonna go ahead and create that. So in order to do this, we need more than just one vertex here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add some loop cuts. The shortcut for doing that is Control R. So I'm gonna press that. And then you should see a little yellow dot appear here. I'm gonna scroll up to add more. I'm gonna add, let's say 6. So I'm gonna scroll up to add them, and then I'm gonna click, and that will add new vertices here. And since it's mirrored, it will do the same thing on the other side. It didn't work? Oh, it worked? Okay, okay. The next thing we're gonna do is select this middle vertex, the one directly in the middle. And then we want to create this sort of curved shape. And if you remember the demonstration that I did from earlier, we can use proportional editing for that. So I'm going to turn on proportional editing, put it on smooth, which is this thing up here. And then we want to move this on the Y. The green axis is the Y axis, so I'm going to press GY. And then if I move it out, you can see that I can scroll up or down to increase or decrease the size. I think it doesn't need to be that big, so I would say that looks about good. And then the next thing we need to do is give this actually some 3D shape to it. So to do that, we can extrude. I'm going to press A to select everything. And then I'm going to extrude. The shortcut for that is E. And then we want everything to move along the Y-axis, so I'm going to press Y. And then we can give it as much thickness as you like. So you should be at this point now. And now you can see we have a slight issue, and that's that this thing is sticking out the back, which we don't want. Now, there's an easy way to fix this, and that's to actually scale. So let me just do a bit of a demonstration. If I press SY, this will scale along the Y. Oh, let me first turn off proportional editing. Scale Y. And you can see that as we scale it down, the nose hole actually disappears because we're compressing the vertices on the Y-axis. And what we want to do is actually we want to scale it down to nothing. So we can just hit 0. And that will force all of the vertices to line up in the the Y-axis, if that makes sense. So by scaling on the Y0, we've smushed all the vertices to be in the exact same Y position, and now it's a flat surface. And then finally, we need to add a face to the back. And to do that, with the vertices selected, we can simply press F. And now the basic shape is complete. Is everyone at this point?
The last part with you, I guess like pushing back your face. So did you like?
You mean this part? Are you here?
Yeah. So it's like you pushing. Or you extruded it.
Extruded along the Y.
Yeah, and then I guess you flattened that top
Yeah, so to flatten this, you scale along the y, so sy, and then we want to scale it down to nothing, so we just press 0.
But you have grabbed all of them.
All of the ones that are here, not these ones over here.
Oh.
All of the ones on this side.
And it's like vertexes or.
Yeah, I'm in vertex mode right now. Oh, the proportional editing part? All right, let me go back. So are you at this point? Okay, so I'm going to select the vertex in the center. I'm going to turn on proportional editing by clicking this button up here. Okay, and make sure it's set to smooth. Okay. Then I'm going to move, so we want to move it that way, which is along the y. So I'm going to press GY. Let me get rid of this, hold on. Okay, GY. And you may need to scroll in or out to adjust the size of this circle here. And then you can move it out like this. And you should end up with a shape that looks rough. It doesn't need to be exactly the same, it just needs to look roughly like this. Yeah, so press A to select everything. Turn off proportional editing. Remember to turn this off, because we're done with it now. Sorry. Press A to select everything, then E to extrude, and you can see it's kind of like wiggling around. We want to constrain it to the Y axis, so we're going to press Y, and then I'm just going to move it out like that. Do you need help? Okay, let me take a look. Now, you can do the thing where you scale everything. So you want to select, but you need to select only these ones. So you can perhaps hit Alt to select this move. So Alt selects like our group of edges. And then you need to scale along the Y to 0. Right. And then the final thing is to press, so to fill in a face, you just press F. I'm going to catch you up.
How does Trump do that?
We're not using Bezier curves, we're using regular meshes. Yeah.
Okay. I just start with a circle and I just edit.
Bezier curves are like a whole.
Oh no. Okay.
Here, let me get you up to speed. I'm actually gonna delete everything and add a circle. So you missed the beginning step, so I'll just show you. So we added a circle, and then we got rid of. Oh yeah, we rotated it along the x-axis to get upwards on this, and then we we deleted all these. Then we moved it over, and then we moved it. And then clipping basically makes it so that if they meet in the middle, the curves like weld together. So I'm gonna select these two. I'm gonna move them back towards the middle, and then we're gonna join together. And then the next thing I did was I added, because we need to make this sort of like a curve shape up line. So I'm gonna add some loop cuts, which is this tool here, or you can just press Control R. Then I'm gonna scroll up to make more of them, and then click. And so it just adds more vertices up to the tool. Then I click here, proportional editing. Move it along the y-axis with the scroll, like that. You can scroll up or down to. That might be a good thing. Next thing, A to select everything. turn off the bushel. B to extrude, and you can see it's kind of moving all over the place. So you press Y to constrain it, say Y axis.
So you want to constrain the axis, yeah.
Right. And then the next thing we do is we want to flatten this thing. And a cool way to do that is to scale the vertices along the y-axis. And you can see that sort of does this. And then we want it to be 0, which means all of them have the same y value, so they'll all be the same y. 0. And then the last thing we did is to fill in, if you have a bunch of vertices selected, and you want to fill in a face, okay. So we're at this point. So everyone should now be at this point here. You can notice that this doesn't have any thickness to it. It's just like a hollow mesh. We want to give it some thickness, so I'm going to go back into object mode. We don't need this mirror, so I'm going to collapse it. And then I'm going to add a solidify. And I'm going to increase the thickness. So you can see that, yeah, so you need, for modifiers, you go to the wrench tab, yeah. And you want to make the thickness positive, and so that it goes inwards. And you can make it as thick as you want. I think 0.1 meters is probably thick enough. And you want to also check even thickness. It just makes it look, it makes it look a little bit straighter on the inside, I guess. So you can kind of see when we check even thickness, there's like a small difference. Now, the next thing we want to do is actually make this part smooth, like rounded. Because most VR headsets, like the front of it is kind of, you know, it's not just a sharp 90-degree angle, it's kind of rounded off. So we're going to go back into edit mode. We're going to select this face in the back. And we're going to press, you can either use the bevel tool, which is here, or you can press Control B to bevel. And then you can move how much you want to bevel and then scroll up to add more cuts. I would say like maybe 4 cuts or so looks good. You don't want to do too many because then it's just adding unnecessary geometry. And then that concludes the basic shape. Okay. I forgot to specify you'll need to be in edit mode to do that. So edit mode is in the top left corner. Actually, you're already in there. So you're already in here. So select that instead of being go to face selection, which is the third one. So this is vertex edge face.
Oh, God.
Oh, I see what you. So the reason you can't see anything is because that's just solidifying outwards. So you want to change that to negative. And then you want to select just this space, and then bevel it. I would just use Control D to bevel it. Not too much. And then scroll up to add more detail. And then you can add more cuts. So once you're satisfied, let go of it. And then you can go down here and edit the little things. Segments or something. So yeah, okay. So we finished the basic shape of the headset. The next thing to do is to add the eyepieces in the middle. So we're going to start similarly to how we started the headset. I'm going to start by, excuse me, I'm going to start by adding a circle. And just like before, I'm going to rotate it along the X 90 degrees. So it should look like this. All right, so you should have a circle and rotate it along the X 90 degrees so it's facing upwards. And then we obviously need to be smaller, so let's scale it down by pressing S. That looks about right. And then you can see that in an actual VR headset, the eye lenses are not perfectly circular. They kind of have this like, I don't know how to, this like blob shape. So we're going to use our good friend proportional editing to fix that. So select circle selected, tab into edit mode. Oh, I accidentally, hold on, don't do what I did. If you added the circle in edit mode, don't do that. Make sure you're in object mode and then you add the circle because we need them to be separate objects. So if you made the same mistake I did, undo that. Make sure you're in object mode and then you add the circle and then you scale it down. Otherwise, you're going to run into problems. All right, so we have our eyepiece circle. Then I'm going to go into edit mode on this circle. I'm going to go into vertex selection mode. And I want to enable proportional editing. And I'm going to click this little green thing to sort of make it so that we're looking directly on the y-axis. I'm talking about this thing up here. You can click that to look directly at it. And then I'm going to turn on proportional editing, grab this like lower right vertex, and then I'm going to move it. I'm going to scroll down so that it's not so big. I'm going to move it inwards like that. So you can see that I'm sort of editing the shape like that. And you should get a shape that looks roughly like that. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect. Does anyone need help to get to this point? Good? All right. The next thing is to extrude it, of course. So yeah, I'm just gonna go into edit mode, select everything, E to extrude, Y, and then extrude it out a bit. It doesn't need to be that deep. So we're extruding this the same way that we did the other headset, like the outer body of it. It's just the same thing. We're just selecting everything, E to extrude, Y along the y-axis, and then you get this shape. And then once you've done that, we're going to add a solidify modifier because this is right now just a flat faces. We need some thickness. So I'm going to solidify it just a little bit. Not too thick. Like that. So you should end up with something that looks like this. All good? Okay. Then I'm going to select everything, and I'm actually going in edit mode. I'm going to move it along the x-axis. Oh, first of all, turn off proportional editing. Forgot to say that. Turn off proportional editing. Then we're going to move it along the x-axis over to where we think it should be, about there. Looks about right to me. And then we want the same exact thing duplicated on the right side, but like flipped. And so the easiest way to do that is, of course, the mirror modifier. So I'm going to add a mirror. And as you can see, we now have two of them. Okay. All good? Yeah, so G and then X, because we're moving it to the left. Let me take a look.
So in this case, you just move it. Oh, you press A to select all. Because what was happening is you're only selecting the promos. When you press A to select all, and then you and then you mirror it. Yeah. And there you go. All right. Anyone else stuck on there? No. It's supposed to be separate. All right. Oh, why don't you fix this? It's not a chunk. It is the mesh of the object. Yeah. Okay. So, oh dear. It's gonna go back to Daisy. Well, if you can. Here. I'm just gonna fix this. Cool. So that's that. I think your mistake was adding a circle in edit mode because you want them to be separate. If you add it in edit mode, it adds it to the existing mesh. You want to add this circle in object mode so that it's actually a separate object. So circle.o1, and then and then yeah, you can extrude it, solidify it, and then Y. You don't need to hold down. You can hold up there. That might not be it. No, you can fix this by just, or you can just do it again. There's no shift. It's just repetition. No, that's automatically mirrored. So
Oh god.
Yes, A to select all. A. Yep. And then Y. That's too much. That's fine. Cool. And then you want to add a solidify modifier to make it fit. It's gonna be on. It's gonna be in this. And then you slide it over. I did mine later. Yeah, if you could do it. Cool. Okay. The next thing we're gonna do is, you can notice that these eyepieces have like sharp edges. And to fix that, after our mirror, we're gonna add, actually, sorry. We're going to add a subdivision surface that will smooth it out. And I'm actually going to put the subdivision surface before the mirror. It's just generally a good idea to put everything before the mirror. So you should have solidify, subdivision, then mirror. And you can see that this kind of worked, but the edges are still a little bit too sharp. And that's because it's trying to solidify over this entire long face. The way to fix that is to add more loop cuts. So you can either use this loop cut tool or you can just press Control R. I'm going to scroll up to add 3 of them. And as you can see, it looks a lot better now. The next thing to do is to shade smooth. And there's the eyepieces done. Okay. Do you want me to go through that one more time? All right, I'm going to undo this. Oops, I undid too much. Whatever, that's fine. So we've solidified it by a little bit. And then we mirror. Okay, so we're at this point. And then subdivision surface is the next thing we want to add. And I'm going to put before mirror. And it's too sharp, so we're going to add more loop cuts. You can use the loop. I'll demonstrate using the loop cut tool. So click loop cut. Move your mouse to the middle here so you get this yellow outline. Scroll up. Oh, right. Oh, if you're using the tool, you have to go up here and change the number of cuts. That's why I prefer keyboard shortcuts, because like it's just easier. But if you're using the tool, you go number of cuts 3 and then click, and it should look like this. Is it good? Okay, cool. And then you right click shade smooth, and that is it for the eyepieces. The next thing, if you notice here, the inside of the headset looks smooth. That's because I just right clicked and shade auto smooth on the headset. So you can go on the body of the headset, shade auto smooth, and now it will look like it does in the picture. And then obviously our eyepieces need to be moved into place. So I'll just, in object mode, GUI, move them back until they sort of are about to intersect with the back of the headset. And that looks good. I actually just noticed my eyepieces are a little bit small. So I think I'm actually going to scale them up a little bit. I also think they're too high up, so you can make small adjustments if you want. I'm gonna move them closer together. And okay, that looks a bit better. Okay, the next thing to do is that when we move the main body of the headset, we want the eyepieces to move with it, but right now it doesn't do that, and that's because they're not parented. So I'm gonna click the eyepieces, and we're in object mode, by the way. Click the eyepieces, shift select the body of the headset, and then P, actually it's control P, object. And now if we go under circle, we can see circle.01, which is our eyepieces, and if we move this, they'll move together. And just for organization's sake, we can actually rename this. So if we say, if we click on this and press F2, rename, so I'll call this headset and eyepieces. But that's an optional. You don't have to do that. It's just for organization. All right, let's move to the next slide. The foam padding. So every VR headset has some kind of facial interface, which may be silicone or foam. But right now our headset looks a little bit off because it doesn't have those things. So we're gonna add that. And one easy way to add that is to just take this front face of the headset, duplicate it, and then make it a little bigger. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go into edit mode on the headset. Oh yeah, one thing we need to actually have access to this front face that I'm moving over my mouse over. And in order to get access to that, we actually have to apply our solidify. So this is one instance where we actually do need to apply a modifier. So I'm gonna go ahead and apply the mirror first, then apply the solidify. And now we have no more unapplied modifiers on our headset. Now if we go into edit mode, you can see all of our geometries here. And I'm gonna go into face select mode. And I'm going to alt select one of these faces. Sorry. Yeah, there we go. You wanna get it so that it's selected all of these. So you wanna alt select on one of these edges, like right here. and then it should select everything in a loop around here. The next thing you want to do, the next thing you want to do is duplicate it. So we want to create another copy of it. And how you duplicate in Blender is Shift D to duplicate. And then it wants us to move it, but I don't want to move it. So we're going to right click to cancel the movement. The next thing we want to do is just separate this out into a separate object. And to do that, I'm going to press P, separate by selection. And then if we go back into object mode, you can see we have this separate object from the headset. And I'm going to rename this foam. And I'm going to do the same thing by parenting it to the headset. So now we have headset, eyepiece, foam. All right, who needs help? Okay. You want to select the eyepiece, then shift select the headset. You don't need to shift select the headset. Control. Now the next thing we did was we applied these small objects. So, so you gotta go to this little drop down, apply, and then the next one as well. Okay, now when you go into edit mode on the headset itself, who wants to go to side question? You see we have everything. So we're going to apply it. And then we're going to go to the selection mode.
Pairing now stage channels, you can share your screen.
And then you're going to alt select. Select this.
Or set up like a group upstairs. No.
That's kind of the next thing we want to do is duplicate it, so let's shift duplicate. And then right click, cancel out the movement. And then we're going to separate the objects. So to separate, you just press P. And there you go. Okay, so we should be at this point now. And the next thing we want to do is we want to go into edit mode on this foam object. So make sure we have the foam selected. Go into edit mode. And we're going to scale down the inside of it. So we're going to go into edge select mode, which is this button here. And then I'm going to alt select the inside edge like that. So what you should see is that only the inside edges, like this ring around the inside, is selected. Like so. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to scale it down, so that's S. Okay. And then we are going to add a solidify because we need some thickness. And I want it to go outwards, so like that. And you can see this looks very sharp and blocky, which is not what we want. We want it to be smooth, so we're going to add a subdivision surface. Subdivision surface. And maybe increase the levels to 2 to make it smoother. And it looks like I didn't solidify it enough, so maybe make it thicker. That might be too much. And for the foam, oh, whoops. We want to shade smooth. Whoops, I accidentally zoomed in a bunch. Okay. And it looks a little small, so I'm going to scale it up ever so slightly. I think I need this to be a little bit thicker. So Let me just make some adjustments. Okay, and then I'm gonna move it back into the headset, like so. So now we have some foam padding on our headset. Everything good? Do it again. Oh, you need to go? Okay. All right, so does anyone else need help? Do you want me to get you caught up? Then I applied, so in order to get access to this like face here, like we can't see, we need to apply the surfly. And when you apply modifier, it's generally a good idea to apply everything before it. So apply.
Oh, it's awesome.
Now we have all of this. And then, oh, you have like numpy expressions. So I've alt selected this loop of faces. Shift D to duplicate it. Right click to cancel movement. P separate selection. Now I have a new object, which I'm going to go into object mode and rename this to foam. My first F2 is rename Then parent the same way. So now I have headset, eyepiece isn't foam as a child. Foam, edits. We're going to go into edge selection mode. Alt select the inside ring of edges. Oh, I'm in face select. Okay. Scale it down. Do thickness. And then we're going to solidify.
What's scaling down to the size key, right?
Yeah, just scale it. Okay. Or X. And then I'm going to thicken. And then we're going to subdivide surface. Shade smooth and better. And then adjust this too. And then I scale it ever so slightly. And then move it backwards. That's the wrong. Okay. The next thing is the side. So this is probably one of the more difficult parts. We need to do the side straps and the top strap. But don't worry, it's not too difficult. What we're going to do is we're going to start with a plane. So make sure we're in object mode. Then I'm going to add a plane. And we're going to need to scale this down a bit. But first, we're going to rotate it along the Y 90 degrees. Excuse me. And then we're going to move it along the x-axis so that it's on the side of the headset like this, because that's where our strap is going to start. I just realized my headset is a little bit long, but whatever. And so now that you moved it over here, we're going to scale it down until it looks about the thickness of a regular headset strap. And then we're going to move it over like so until it looks like it's about lined up. And then we're going to look down from above. So I'm going to press the Z to look down directly from above. and I'm going to rotate it slightly so that it just barely touches the edge of the headset, like this. Maybe that's a bit too much. Okay, so we have our little plane here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable X-ray mode and select, I'm going to go into, edit mode on this plane. Select just these vertices. So if you look in the 3D view, it should just have this edge, these two vertices selected. And then we're going to go into top-down view by clicking on the Z. And then once you're in this position, we are going to repeatedly extrude this outwards to make like a sort of strap shape, like a curve. So in order to do that, we press E to extrude. And then we're just going to keep doing this in little increments. So just keep pressing E. And I kind of messed that one up, but that's okay. You can press Control Z. And we're going to keep extruding this outwards in little increments until you start to get to the bottom. And then we're going to curve it inwards like this. And I'm going to leave it before it hits the y-axis. Okay. I didn't do a particularly amazing job, but it gets the job done. So here's the edge of our strap. We can exit X-ray mode. So it should look something like this when you're done. Does anyone need any help? Oh, so I was gonna do a mirror to get it to be the same.
Oh, okay.
So you don't actually need to get all. Yeah. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a mirror modifier. And this time we want the axis. Oh, I just realized I made a slight mistake. You can see that the little orange point here, I don't know if you can see that. That's the origin of the object. We actually need the origin of the object to be here because that's where when you mirror an object, it's mirrored about its origin. Thankfully, there is a way to fix this. If we click on this object set origin to 3D cursor, and that will move since we never moved the 3D cursor, it's still at the origin. And so that will set the object's origin to be the world origin, which is what we want. And then when we mirror along the Z axis, something is off. Something is very off. Hello? What did I do? You should just be mirroring, like... Okay. Yeah, okay. There's a slight issue due to the quirky way that Blender handles transforms. You'll need to click on the object, press Control A, apply rotation, and then the mirror modifier should work correctly. And of course, we're going to turn on clipping, and we're going to join these two together by going into edit mode. And I'm just going to extrude this into the middle until they meet, like that. And since we have clipping turned on, they'll join together, like so. So you should end up with something that looks like that.
So before you did the mirror, how did you reset the cursor to the
you're going to go to object mode. And then object, and to the right of that object.
Yep.
To the right of where it says
Oh,
object.
yeah.
Object. Yep. Set origin on the top. Set origin right
Alright.
to 3D person. So that will set up correctly in mirror. Then you need to apply the rotation. So it's going to be x-axis,
Right.
but you need to apply the rotation. So it's Control A, rotation. Then enable X on the mirror.
I did it.
Oh, you did it. And then if you turn on clipping, you can weld them together in the center. Okay. Is everyone at this point? All right. So the next thing to do is to add a bit of thickness. So we're going to solidify. And yep, that looks about good. Actually, I'm going to solidify the other way, I think. Yeah. And I'm going to shade auto smooth. And I'm going to increase the auto smooth angle to 45 degrees to smooth out these edges. All right. So that should basically complete the strap. I did a much better job of it in the original image, but anyway. Moving on, the top strap is the exact same thing, except we're not going to mirror it. We're just going to add a plane, move it up, scale it down. We're going to look at it from the side, so we're going to click the red X. Object, set origin to precursor. Cool, apply rotation. All right, so we're just gonna, for the top strap, we're gonna do the exact same thing that we did for the side straps, just going up instead of side to the side, basically. So I'm gonna move this up, and I want it to go something like this. So I'm gonna keep extruding outwards, making sure that I'm doing it right. I'm gonna keep repeatedly clicking E until we meet at approximately the bottom. And it should look something like this once you're done. And then exact same as before, shade auto smooth, solidify. All right, does everyone have their top strap? Do you need help mirroring it? Yeah, so go to, so right now it's mirroring about the origin, which is right there. So object, set origin, and then you're gonna do the same thing except like the top strap. So it's the exact same process, just with no mirroring. Okay. So you're gonna want to go to object mode, add a new plane. Like we're doing it all over, so shift A to add an object. Plane. And then you're gonna move it upwards, scale it down. Yep. Yep. And then you are going, oh, we need to do the same thing. So look on the, click the red X. And then rotate it to the face upwards.
Oh, goes with that.
Yeah, so it's like that. That's a little too much. It's like, yeah. And then we're going to only want to select the, so go to, yeah, so go into edit mode on that. Specifically on the, you want to select that. Yeah. And you want to go select go back to the 1x inside RD, and then we're gonna repeatedly like extrude and yeah, so E and that's you always go with smaller increments so you get like the curve of it. You don't have to specify the axis because we're already looking at Cylon. So you can just press E and then click over everything. And you should end up with a thing that looks like this, and then we're just adding a solidify after that. All right.
Way to like, I guess flip the normals or something of these. 'Cause I think I accidentally did that.
Okay, so in order to check, we're gonna go to this drop down here, and we're gonna enable face orientation, and everything should be blue if you did it right. So if you have red, it's bad. You need an auto.
Turn off something. Well, yeah, I don't know what I did on this graph then. I think it solidified half of it this way, the other way, that way. But I think I accidentally pressed it. But
Okay, go into edit mode on that.
yeah.
Okay, not A. Shift N to recalculate normals. There you go.
Oh, okay.
It looks like you have disjoint. And by distance. That should fix it.
Oh, nice. What are those?
It
Or
just
you merged
so you had two separate disconnected meshes, and it
Yeah.
merged by distance, so vertices like welded together.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
Mm-hmm. All right. So now we'll move on to the next slide. Finishing. Okay. So what I did is I went into. I am going to select my side straps. Shift H to hide everything. So just focus on only this object. And then I went into edit mode. I might have to make these modifiers not show. And then I'm gonna select this front edge and bevel it. Hello? Oh, right. There's one other thing. So I'm gonna go select this front edge, Control B to bevel. You'll notice that nothing is happening. That's because we're only beveling a single edge and not a face. Like it's not an edge that connects two faces. So we need to press V to enable vertex beveling. And that will bevel on specific, like individual vertices. And then we can bevel it like that. And then the sides of the straps are, I'm actually going to move this out a little bit. Yeah, there we go. So that looks a little bit better there. And then I'm just going to sort of take this top strap and kind of like tuck it. I'm just going to tuck it down in here just so it looks a little bit nicer. It doesn't have to be perfect. And once you've done that, that concludes the modeling of the VR headset. You should have something that looks roughly like this. And that basically concludes the workshop. I will say, considering what last week's workshop. You don't want to subdivision.
Yeah.
Well, actually, no, this needs to be